G'day everyone and welcome back to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al. I'm really excited to kick off 2026 with you. We've just finished our first full calendar year of podcasts and I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's listened, shared an episode, sent a message or stopped me for a chat. I genuinely appreciate it. This year we're aiming to bring you even more great guests with plenty of practical conversations you can take straight back to your own operation. We'll be featuring more local producers too. People right here in our region who are doing good things, having a crack, who've got great stories worth sharing. I'm also pleased to say that we've got some regular voices returning. Chelsea from Herd Solutions will be joining us on a monthly basis with veterinary updates and timely animal health advice. And Morgs from Elders is back as well, committed to a monthly livestock market update to help us make sense of what's happening and what it might mean on farm. So whether you're listening in the ute, on the tractor or in the yards, welcome back. I'm glad you're here and I hope you enjoy what we've got coming in 2026. Welcome everyone to Digging Deeper. We've got our regular guest back after a layoff over Christmas. Chelsea Hare, how you going?
Yeah, good, thanks, Al. It's good to be back in the seat again.
Now tell us, how was your Christmas and New Year's? It was about 4 weeks ago, or more for Christmas. What do you guys get up to over the break?
For me, not too much. Alison's covered Christmas for the last couple of years, so we decided it was my turn to take the reins over Christmas again.
Did you get a call out?
I did get a couple of call-outs, yeah. So we'll actually talk about some stuff I saw during that period today, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wasn't flat out, but I did have to stay around close to home. I don't remember getting up to too much, but I do very, very clearly remember doing about 2 years' worth of property maintenance on the garden in 2 or 3 days.
That seems to be your holiday thing.
Oh, it's never ending. It's just never ending. But I'm not much of a gardener, and so yeah, luckily some family members come over and chipped in to give me a hand. But yeah, there was a lot of weeds to pull out of the gardens and things like that.
What about your partner? What's he do actually?
Luckily for me, he's a nurse.
He's a nurse, right?
Yeah, so. And he's a real gardener as well. So he recently moved in with me. Yeah. And hence the decision to actually clean the place up a little bit.
Oh, he cracked the whip, did he?
A little bit, yeah. It's amazing what I sort of would just walk past and not notice, like with weeds in the garden and things like that. I sort of have a really good ability to have a set of blindfolds when it comes to that sort of stuff. Yeah. The horse paddocks look good, but and the shed looks good, but yeah, the gardens were a bit overgrown, and so yeah, after we cleaned it up, I went, oh wow, it was pretty bad. Like you just don't realise how bad it gets until you do something about it sometimes. But
yeah, a little story from my side here. We actually are selling the house. I think it actually has sold, but we did the whole pre-photo clean-up. And you just cannot believe how much stuff you walk past for 13 odd years.
Yep.
I spot floods all the time, and I actually dug a drain in and put a pit in, and I thought it took me about 2 hours of digging, and I thought, why didn't I do this a decade ago? So
yeah, I have that all the time. Like I keep putting something off that only takes me an hour to do, and then you do it and you go, God, why didn't I just do that years ago, you know?
I'm the king of procrastinating when I can be. So now you mentioned nurse as your partner there, and you also mentioned the horse paddocks. They're looking nice and neat. You've actually got a little bit of an update for the listeners.
Yeah, I do.
What happened, Charles?
There hasn't been much going on the horse riding front for the last month because and I'd been having a really good run, and you know my young horse I did some shows over the December sort of period, and he was really starting to sort of hit his straps, and I thought, oh, this is great, you know, really.
Now, just for the listeners, that's all on jumping.
All
still?
On show jumping, yep. Yeah, and I gave him a little jump about a month ago at home, and I literally thought to myself, God, this horse is going well. And then the last thing I had to do for the night after doing all the feeds, rugging and everything was just put this one horse away. And I made a mistake of not quite opening a gate wide enough for him as I was leading him through it to put him home. That was the last job I had to do for the night. And he got a bit of a fright and jumped up and landed on my foot.
Right.
So for those who don't probably know what sort of horses I've got, this horse was probably 700 odd kilos. He's probably one of the biggest horses I've ever seen in the flesh. Like he's a big horse, and he had a brand new set of shoes on. So steel shoes, my little foot. So I broke it in 3 places.
Right.
So
did you think it was bad straight away? Did you know it was bad straight away?
I was just completely in denial. I was like, no, this will be fine. This will be fine. It's just bruised.
Yeah.
But it was pretty dramatic. Like, he knocked me over, and luckily my partner was in the backyard doing some vegetable gardening, and he heard me screaming, and I think it was swearing/screaming.
Right.
And he come running out, and anyways, he pulled my boot off and then pulled the sock off, and the tip of my middle toe just sort of almost looked like it fell off, like it had cut through the bone.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was holding on by a flap, and I didn't know the bone was in it at that point. I thought it was just my toenail.
The tip of it, yeah.
And anyway, so he drove his car around and pulled me into it, and we went to the hospital. And
Right. So stitched up then?
I had to go to LRH in Traralgon
Right.
to have it stitched up. So yeah, they just bandaged it and X-rayed it and went, no, moon boot for now.
Yeah.
Go down the line to get it stitched back up. But I thought they'd amputate it. Like, I really didn't have much hope that I'd get the tip of my toe back, because it was pretty. Like, I thought it would have lost a lot of blood supply, so I was quite grateful to get to keep my toe.
Now, did you put it in ice like they say to do it, or you didn't?
No, we just
just
bandaged.
bandaged it.
They put me on IV antibiotics.
Right. Yeah.
Because it was technically an open fracture, so it was bone exposed.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just, as soon as it happened, I took some Panadol and some Nurofen, and yeah, they gave me some slightly better pain relief at the hospital, and yeah, went for a GA the next day. So
Right. So when was this? What date?
this was Wednesday just gone was 3 weeks. So it was 3.5 weeks ago.
Right. Well, just for the listeners, you've actually in your, what do you call it? You don't call it scrubs, your vet scrubs. What do you call it? Overalls?
These are my overalls.
Yeah, you've been out on farm today, haven't you?
Yes. It was admittedly just to have a quick squeeze at an eye. So I'm certainly not really back working yet. But
not pulling calves as yet.
Absolutely not. No. I could have a look at an eye, but that was about all I was really good for. And did a bit of a pasture drive. Would have been a pasture walk if I could walk long distances.
Yeah.
But no, I've been cleared for light duties. I've been cleared to drive. But yeah, light duties being a vet still, unfortunately,
so
doesn't amount to much. So
the past couple of weeks, I'd be interested to know, what does a vet actually do when they are on light duties?
I mean, yeah, good question. I will say Alison's been very busy.
Yeah. I've also noticed her driving around in your car. Yes.
Yeah, we did a car swap because mine's a bit younger and can clock up the Ks a little bit more. So she's been driving my car around doing all my preg testing and everything like that. And I've been preparing discussion groups because we've still got a lot of discussion groups coming up. And I ran one the other day. So they're, presentation style sessions. So most of the time the people that I give them to are quite happy for me to sit down anyways. So I've been doing things like that. Updating our occupational health and safety policies.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, it's pretty dry. And also getting ready for more beef from pastures, which starts this year as well, obviously. So just going through the content for that. So it's really hard to sometimes be motivated to sit in the office and, prepare things for a couple of months down the track. But
yeah, I got accused when I started doing a bit more office work by Jen that I'm not desk fit, because I couldn't sit more than about 2 hours at a desk without just about losing a plot. How do you go sitting at a desk that long?
Yeah, I'm very much the same. Especially sitting at home too. Like, sometimes I just catch myself staring out the window for 10 minutes straight, and then you go, God, how long have I been doing this for? Like, it's it has been challenging, and yeah, you're probably like me, you're used to being out and about doing things, and so it makes me think back to when I was a student, which still wasn't really that long ago. It was only 7 years ago, and I think, God, how did I do that? Because, a vet school degree is 6 years, and, you got 2 years of
That's
VCE.
full on, yeah.
So I did that for 8 years, and I think now, like, wow, how did I do that? But, yeah.
I really give a lot of credit to mature age students that go back.
Yeah.
I went through 12 years of schooling or 13 years of schooling, had a gap year, and then straight into it, and it was tough enough having that 1 year off. But there's no way I could think about full-time studying again now. So.
Yeah, and like when I did my gap year halfway through uni and I went and milked cows, I come back and everyone at uni was just like, why did you come back, you know? I was like, well, I don't want to milk cows forever.
That's it. Now, I just got one question. I reckon I know the answer to this. Was it the horse's fault?
No.
It's never the horse's fault with you horse people.
I will call it out when it is.
Really?
But no, that was my fault. He has piffed me out of the saddle quite a few times where I think, God, I wish he hadn't done that. Like, that was really, really stupid.
Yeah.
But in that instance, I was just asleep, and it's just one of those things where, like, I've owned that place for 2 years, and I know the gate doesn't open the way that I was walking without catching the gravel.
Yeah.
Like, I know that, and, you know, I was just half asleep daydreaming, and, you know, and I'm always really conscious in gateways with that horse because he's so big, and his spatial awareness is not the best.
Yeah, a young horse.
Because he's young. So, it's just unfortunate that, I'm always very conscious of it, and you drop the ball once and you pay the price for it, unfortunately. Yep. It's just the nature of working with horses and livestock, unfortunately. You do. Yeah. And I think, you know, because I went through all of our occupational health and safety standards and everything, and it was sort of a good time, I think, to pause and actually go, you know, what we do is actually quite dangerous. You know, when you sit down and do a risk assessment for things like preg testing and bull testing and really think about the hazards that are there and the outcomes of those hazards, it makes you not want to go back and do it sometimes because it is risky what we do. Yeah,
well, I just for listeners, you came and preg tested some of our heifers at AI'd recently, and I remember thinking at one stage, you're just jumping in that crush, closing that gate as you're getting in there, and it only takes a spook from that cow to back up, and there's 500 odd kilos pushing you into a steel gate sort of thing. And admittedly our yards are quite new and up to scratch, but you'll be jumping in lots of yards that are half as good as that type of thing. And and I think maybe the familiarity with you working around them so often, and me not as much, I sort of noticed it a bit more. But for sure it's a risky job that you guys get into every day. So a good one, and one that's much needed. So when are you back in the saddle then?
I've got another 3 weeks to go.
Yeah.
So still a bit of a way, unfortunately, but it is feeling really comfortable, which is quite frustrating that I feel fine.
Yeah.
And like I'm walking around and it's not painful. It's weird. Like it almost feels like my brain is subconsciously aware of the fact that there's a recovering fracture in my foot. And, you know, I've been cleared to get out of the moon boot and just wear a stiff-soled shoe. But and there's no pain walking, but I do walk with a bit of a hobble because subconsciously your brain knows it can't extend to the same range of motion that it would normally have. But I haven't been taking pain relief really since probably the 5 to 7 day mark. It hasn't really been a major drama. So and the breaks weren't bad. You know, the two in the foot itself, so my 2 metatarsals. You know, they were still perfectly aligned and, you know, the ends were right, like touching each other. So it's not like, you know, there's been a huge amount of displacement between the bones. The toe was the most damaged. And so, everywhere I go, I wear steel caps because probably the thing that has injured it the most is I keep accidentally kicking furniture.
I was going to say, walking down, get a glass of water at night time or something.
And like I gave my dad a hug the other day and I accidentally kicked him in the shin with my moon boot and like it nearly dropped me. It's just because I lost my toenail as well. So the toenail growing back has actually probably been the most painful part. So
no infection?
No, I took antibiotics. So they gave me IV antibiotics and then I took antibiotics for a period of time after. So
no, well, good luck with that recovery. I've had a few knee operations in the past, and it's that once you feel good is the most risky time actually. So make sure you take all the time and do the rehab too if they
haven't prescribed any. I think because the breaks were pretty minor, everyone I've spoke to that's had similar injuries has sort of said they've healed without too major of an issue.
Well, I'm going to look into it tonight and set you up a rehab plan because rehab is one of the most underrated things, I think. So, It's boring, but it's worth doing. All right, let's move on. You mentioned just before that over the Christmas break you did get called out to a couple of cases.
Yeah.
Do you want to share what you actually found, and then we'll go through a few other things along that line as well?
Yeah, so we've seen a couple of disease outbreaks just with a bit of respiratory disease over the summer period. And one particular case that we saw was quite interesting that, it was a trading enterprise that was just having a slowly accumulating amount of mortalities and sort of sudden death, for the lack of a better word, or where they might come out in the morning and something looked sick and by the afternoon it was dead.
So is this one a day or
a couple a week?
Right.
So it's not like coming out and seeing 20 dead animals, which would make you think toxin or something like that. But it was just this sort of slow burn that the first few you go, oh, maybe it's just weird natural causes, but then by the time you get to 6 or 7 over a 3 or 4 week period, things start to get a little bit concerning. So, I think on the case 6 or 7, I went out to look at a crook animal, and there was also a dead one in the paddock as well. And because there had been a slow sort of accumulation, we got an approval for a significant disease investigation. So that's where the Victorian government will come to the party with some disease testing that's provided at no charge.
Yeah, now I was curious about that. Is that on your discretion whether you get it, or do they still approve it?
Well, it's up to us to request for a significant disease investigation to be put through. A AgVic veterinary officer has to approve it, so we have to put forward a case. And it's always done verbally over the phone. We don't have to do any, we get approval whilst we're on farm. So, I spoke to our local DVO, who was really helpful, and we also did an anthrax test, just because even though it didn't quite fit the bill of anthrax, we just wanted to rule that out for everyone's safety around us. And
have you ever found a positive anthrax test?
No. I'd have to look it up, but it's been several decades since we've had any cases off the top of my head in this district. I think if you go more to central Victoria, there is a bit of an anthrax belt. But it hasn't been in Gippsland for quite some years, but it's still always the first thing you sort of think about if there's been several mortalities over a short space of time. And there are sometimes some carcass indicators that can make you more suspicious of it as well. So if the animal is not in full rigour and there's bloody orifices, so if there's blood coming from the mouth, eye, anus or vagina or ears, then that would make you a little bit more suspicious. And I think in this case, because it had been dead for a period of time, this particular animal, it had started to lose its rigour, which was probably a time thing more so than because of any other particular disease process. But we still ran a test just to be on the safe side, and it tested negative. So, we pressed on with the post-mortem. And, when we got into the insides of that animal, we found some adhesions. So the lung had stuck to the rib cage, which is quite unusual. So we call that pleuritis. So that's where the pleural lining of the lung gets stuck to the lungs itself. So we found that quite unusual. So we took a heap of samples of that. And
what was your first thought seeing that?
My first thought was it's some sort of respiratory disease, but sometimes with the lung patterns you can have a bit of an idea, but really you need to get those diagnostic samples to know for certain what the causative agent is, because with respiratory disease in cattle there's at least half a dozen viruses and 4 or 5 different strains of bacteria that often overgrow once a virus causes reduced immune system function in the lungs itself. So sometimes it's primary bacterial disease, but sometimes it's a mix of a virus that comes along first and then the bacteria will overgrow.
Right. So those biopsies that you take, they'll show up all those different things that happen.
Sometimes I'm sure people would probably have heard of a PCR test from COVID era. So
I've just about erased that from my memory. Thanks, Charles. But thanks for traumatising me again.
Yeah, so we'll use for those bacteria. Sometimes they'll do a PCR test which looks for bacterial fragments.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily tell us if the bacteria was alive or dead at the time of death, though. So sometimes you need to interpret a PCR with caution, because just because it's there doesn't mean it was necessarily causing the disease. But also we can do cultures as well, which is where you actually grow the bacteria in a lab setting. But unfortunately with cultures, some bacteria just don't grow in labs for whatever reason. They, act all tough inside the animal. Then you get it into a lab environment and funnily enough, it doesn't want to grow. So the PCR testing's been very helpful for those types of bacteria. And also they can do those PCR testings like for COVID. They can do them for things like PESTI and BRSV, which is bovine viral syncytial virus. Not that anyone probably cares about that specifically.
I know the acronym, but that's about as far.
Yeah. So that we can do some PCRs for the different viruses as well. So, which is interesting because I've done, some testing in the past where, sometimes those PCRs weren't available, and it's a relatively new sort of evolving thing to be able to even do those. So it's quite handy to have now. So
so it gives you a bit more of a picture straight up, but you still don't know a whole lot, you said, until you send stuff away. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also those results can take 7 to 10 days. To get us a result as well. So you do need to make some sort of plan. Yeah,
I was going to ask, so you've done the autopsy. Did they have to euthanize that other crook one?
No, funnily enough, I tried because it was down when I got to the farm. And so I tried to examine it as a downer animal, but every time I got within 2 metres of it, it got up and walked away. But it looked obviously pretty sick. So before I did the post-mortem and I just looked at that live one, I was also considering Theileria as well, because that's quite a common thing with Theilerias, because they're anemic. They're just weak. So they'll, get up and get down, and, they might get a burst of energy, but they're just really, really weak. So that was, and because these animals had come from an area where Theileria wasn't particularly prevalent, sometimes we do see problems with it.
Naive sort of cattle.
Yeah, so we've got naive cattle coming into an area like ours where, Theileria is everywhere. So that was still sort of on the possibility list. But after I did that post-mortem, it became pretty obvious that it was more likely a respiratory disease. Yeah. And so, we made some immediate measures to try and stop the spread of whatever respiratory issues were going on.
Just in a broad sense, what would something like that look like?
So if it's possible, and you've got to weigh up the pros and cons of doing so, is trying to remove any animals that look obviously sick from the herd, which is easiest.
Can you box them together, or is that
you
not
can?
wise?
The risk is that, if you run the whole mob into muster and sort them, is that you're actually, because these bugs are often aerosolized and they're transmitted from close contact, you run them all into the yards, you're actually then going to create what we would call in the COVID era a super spreader event. So
and you increase their breathing rates and things like that.
And you stress them further as well. So we tried to get them to try and single out any single animals if they could, but also bearing in mind that we don't want to make it disease transfer any worse. This particular farm had dams, so if they had troughs, we would tell people to thoroughly clean the troughs out on a daily basis, because communal watering points do become a bit of a reservoir for.
So can that bacteria actually survive in the trough? Is that what you're saying?
Some of them can, and some viruses can as well. So in the saliva of animals, if we've got animals coming and going within an hourly sort of period from each other, they don't survive for long periods. But when it's a communal area, we can certainly get some transmission at those types of sites. But dams are reasonably lower risk because those dams were quite large, so the likelihood of an animal coming to exactly the same spot to take a drink is lower. So, and they're not slobbering on the concrete itself. So and the other thing we did sort of get them to do was, because they were supplementing with some pasture hay, but we actually got them to stop doing that, and instead of having.
Is that the same reason as the trough?
Yeah, because they're, coming into a communal area. Yeah. and also because there was abundant pasture supply. It wasn't like they were going to starve if they didn't have that. So for a period of time while we were trying to ascertain what was going on, we advised them to stop that communal feeding practice just so that we would again reduce the transmission. So one of the risk factors that this farm had, and a lot of farms that do trade, is that there are a lot of animals coming from different farms and being yarded together and put into a mob. So we do see farms that have got a lot of issues with respiratory disease is that commingling of animals from different sources.
Yeah.
And that's not just because different animals bring in different diseases, but also because a lot of people, I think, probably underestimate the stress that it puts on animals when they have to reset a social hierarchy because there's different animal sources coming together. It's like us, if we get all boxed in together with people we don't know, we do find it quite socially stressful, and the calves find it the same. So we sort of tried to encourage any sort of practice that would reduce the stocking density into any particular area to simply reduce the stress.
Yeah. And so this is all before you know what's going on.
Yeah, so irrespective of what the cause is, sort of similar to COVID, any sort of steps that are going to encourage social distance and reduce, aerosolization of pathogens. Unfortunately, we can't ask cows to wear masks, so we had to just get that.
Whether that works anyway is a conversation.
Exactly.
So how long from taking the biopsies or the samples and getting results back? Like, when did you know more, I guess?
We usually start to get results within sort of 3 or 4 days, but they do dribble in over a sort of week-long period of time. So when we finally got the actual diagnosis, it was the last thing that came in.
Oh, really?
was the positive PCR. So they did some cultures of the samples I took, which didn't grow anything because, as I said, sometimes the underlying pathogen doesn't like to grow under lab conditions. But we got a positive PCR for Histophilus. So it's a reasonably common cause of bacterial pneumonia in young growing animals. It can also cause meningitis, and so we can see neurological symptoms with
What's
Histophilus.
meningitis?
So it's an inflammation of the lining of the brain.
Right.
So any sort of down animals, you might see them occasionally where they've got their head curled back, and we call that opisthotonus, where they're on their side and paddling, and it's not quite stargazing, but they'll curl their head backwards. And
so a bit of disorientation sort of behaviour.
Yeah. And it can also localise into joints. And so after the outbreak, there was actually a couple that ended up with swollen joints, and I do wonder if retrospectively they possibly had the bacteria, but they had a joint version of it, which is not as fatal, but still far from ideal.
And you said, what was the name of that, the respiratory?
The pathogen.
Yeah.
So Histophilus was the name of the bacteria.
You said that was somewhat common, but not always fatal then.
It's actually, quite often fatal, but the interesting thing with it is that it's a bug that often lives in the respiratory tract in normal animals. So
almost as a host, is it? Or
it's just one of the bacteria that will sometimes
live
in that area, and so it's a really hard thing to control. It's sort of like that Moraxella bacteria that lives on the surface of the eye in cattle that don't have pink eye, but then we see it in cattle that get pink eye as well. So in terms of controlling it, stress minimisation and, good nutrition, good trace element nutrition becomes really important, because it's just one of those bugs that will opportunistically cause disease when the host is a bit run down.
I think you mentioned these cattle were vaccinated for a respiratory as well.
Yeah,
is that right?
And that was quite an interesting finding as well, is that they had been vaccinated. So there's 2 main respiratory vaccines that we have available. So there's the herpes virus vaccine, and then there's the Mannheimia hemolytica, also known as MH. So there's a vaccine for that too. And there is also vaccines that have got both of them in the single shot, and they've got different, some of them are single shot, some of them are multiple. And so this farm was vaccinating, and
do you know which vaccine they were using?
Off memory, it was a 2-in-1 combo, but I can't remember quite off the top of my head, but I'm fairly sure.
And so that one won't touch
Won't touch your Staphylococcus, no. So, unfortunately, even if we do have these vaccines on board, which, in the feedlot setting are quite important, and often, a lot of people are using these vaccines because there's some sort of agreement with a feedlot company. So the feedlot company often will supply them.
And require it almost.
So they like them to be vaccinated so that, when they come to the feedlot down the line, they've already got that immunity on board. So, which is common sense, because you don't want them going into a high risk area like a feedlot and vaccinating them on arrival, because they're going to be stressed on arrival. So it's going to reduce the efficacy of the vaccine itself, but also, you want that immunity there before they arrive, so that that really high risk marginal window is covered from the moment they get there. So that's a lot of the time where those, the underlying reason why those agreements exist. But I think it's a good practice to do. But I think the thing to probably be aware of is that if you just rely on the vaccine and don't do any of the stress mitigation, you can still obviously get some problems with respiratory disease. The other thing that there's less data on in terms of the economic benefits of doing so, but pestivirus is also technically a respiratory pathogen, so it can cause low-grade respiratory disease. Right. So some people will also vaccinate for pesty for that reason, but being a reasonably expensive vaccine can be a bit hard to quantify the cost benefit of doing so.
Yep, there's a possibility of lots of vaccines for an operation, isn't there? You've got to pick the ones that are going to be most vital for each operation, I guess. So,
yeah, that's right.
So once you got the results and you call the producer back up, what advice do you give then? Because there's no vaccine, you said, for it.
Yeah.
You just got to monitor more sick animals and keep on low stress.
Yeah.
And all those other...
So because we already had those sort of initial control strategies in place, and the frustrating thing with respiratory diseases is, if you have that blanket, approach to, minimising stocking density and, minimising that communal transfer and things like that. By the time I think we got the results, I think they had one or two more fatalities and that was it. So, thankfully, but, it's... it was no particular antibiotic or anything like that was going to make all the difference. It's just a management thing at the end of the day. Yeah.
So I'm assuming they're a fairly heavily stocked enterprise.
In terms of like DSE per hectare, I guess in terms of a productivity perspective, yes, but I certainly would not call it an overstocked property whatsoever.
No, I'm just thinking though, because we've got them, we're sort of trying to separate and open up paddocks. That's probably not their usual practice of farming. So then they start slowly bringing those molds back together once the stress levels have sort of resided in the animals and they're more comfortable.
So, and that's a good point that, a lot of these diseases, unfortunately, the way that we practice best practice grazing management with rotational grazing is unfortunately going to have that pendulum swing with animal health in some regards as well, because if we're going to practice rotational or cell grazing to get the most out of the pasture, it does mean that animals are going to be more densely populated for small periods of time, which does mean that disease transfer can increase. So when I got this diagnosis, I obviously went online and went and looked for some resources on it, and one of the case notes I found was from the New South Wales DPI, where they had some outbreaks of it back in 2012, and the properties that they referred to that were having problems with it were regarded as the most, forward-thinking, productive, well-run properties at the end of the day. And so it's really frustrating because, if we had them set stocked on a lower stocking density, you probably wouldn't have such a problem with these issues, but it's also not as profitable. So unfortunately, and I would certainly put this property in that boat, everything was managed exceptionally well. And unfortunately, sometimes you just get a bit unlucky. Someone brings something in and unfortunately disease just goes through.
All the stars aligned in the wrong way. Type of thing, so.
But, I think the good part of it was that we did, once we acted, the positive was that the mortalities did stop very quickly. So, and that comes down to good management at the end of the day. So
and understanding how it all works and watching for those signs. Now, I want to also discuss the fact that after these results came back, you actually got a bit of a phone call requesting some extra info or something. You want to share what happened there?
Yeah, so the pathologist actually emailed me that did the samples and said, oh, look, we're seeing this across the state quite a fair bit. Do you have any photos I could have? So, I emailed him some photos across of us.
Did you copyright them, did you?
No. I'm generous like that. I emailed him across some photos and he said, oh, can I have some of them alive? And I said, unfortunately, there's not really many of them alive because they were just found dead, unfortunately. But we did have some interesting photos.
What was he hoping to see with an alive animal?
Sometimes those neurological signs can be quite useful,
before,
and also symptoms of respiratory disease as well. I was able to get him a photo, though, of a swollen joint because those joint problems can be part of it as well. He was super grateful for that. We did get some good photos of the respiratory lesions as well, which I think should be... there was some really spectacular photos on the Flock and Herd New South Wales DPI site that I read as well that, because this particular bug can cause pretty spectacular internal abscessing. So, really big lung abscesses and things like that, which we didn't see, probably because unfortunately the animals didn't live long enough to develop those sorts of abscesses.
So just thinking back, actually, when you've done different tests for me, you often get the stethoscope out. You'll hear something.
Yeah, actually, one of the ones that I examined, which then died a few days later, it was interesting, and I think this probably is important to note, is that even though it was obviously suffering from an infection, its temperature was normal.
Right.
And I remembered saying to these producers, I said, my gut feeling is it's got respiratory disease. The temperature was normal.
Normally it's elevated.
You would expect it to be, you would expect it to be elevated if there was an infection. And I remembered, I'd looked at the left-hand side and thought, the lungs don't sound too bad, but the right hand didn't sound too crash hot. And then, I actually post-mortemed that animal and did find that was what was...
That was where the lesions were.
Yeah. There was some in the left by the time it died, but there was definitely some of those lesions in the right. But like lung glands are really hard to pin down if there's respiratory disease at times, especially if there's a lot of lung destruction. By the time you actually see it, sometimes you just don't hear anything because the air's just not going in for the lungs at all. With
the actual physical breathing, they'll be laboured or shallow.
Yeah, so sometimes even just looking at the respiratory rate and how deep their breathing can be.
What are some numbers for us? You said, what is the respiratory rate?
Usually it's around sort of 20 to 30. So in this
similar
instance,
to a human, I think.
Yeah. So if it's getting around sort of 40 to 60, you'd start to go, there's probably.
Yeah. So it normally spikes, does it?
It'll go up. So although sometimes unless there's severe airway blockage, sometimes it will slow and drag out a little bit. But often I find with cattle the respiratory rate is higher and shallower. So particularly, and this is getting probably a bit too detailed for what the people here we're speaking to want to hear, but when we've got disease that's in what we call the pleural space, which is between the lungs and the rib cage, because it impacts the ability of the lungs to fully expand, they'll get these short shallow breaths because physically the lungs can't expand. The space just isn't there. So often, we'll get that fast, shallow breathing. But you can also get the, slow laboured breathing as well, which is more associated with the airways, not that pleural space, which is that space between the lungs and the rib cage. Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned temperature before. It's slightly different to humans, doesn't it?
It's a lot higher. So, if we saw a temperature of 39 in a cow, we probably wouldn't get too excited, but if obviously that was a person, we would get quite alarmed. So cows will run at up to 39.5, and that can be considered normal, especially on a warm day. So but unfortunately, because of the way that cows' immune systems work, sometimes they'll have an early phase of the disease where they do run a temperature, but if they survive that initial period, the way that a cow's immune system works is they will actively try and wall off an infection which means that the temperature will return to normal, but there's still a bacterial infection there.
Yeah.
So one case that really stood out to me when I was a new grad was on a dairy farm where I examined this cow and it had a normal temperature and its rumen rate was just a little bit low. So being a freshly calved dairy cow, I was a bit suspicious of just a subclinical hypocalcemia or milk fever.
Yeah.
So I gave it a big calcium drench and for a few days it got better. And then I re-examined it a few days later and it had a temperature. And I thought, oh, this is weird. And I remember putting my hand in it and thinking it had some signs of peritonitis. And so my boss went out and did surgery on it and he said he opened it up on the right-hand side of its abdomen and pus just poured out of its abdomen as soon as he opened it. So obviously, you know, for whatever reason, when I first saw that cow, it didn't have a temperature, but
the bacteria was
the
there.
bacteria had managed to climb back up again on day 3. And yes.
Gross. I can't deal
gross.
with pus. Sorry. Even talking about it creeps me out a bit. Anything else on this one? Because we actually got a little bit more to go, even though it's been quite a bit in that one. Is there anything else you'd like to say or need to say before we move on?
I probably didn't emphasise it enough because we were talking more about the disease process, but I think for those types of trading enterprises, being mindful of selenium and copper status on arrival as well becomes quite important for disease prevention because those are trace elements that are really important for immune system function. So particularly selenium is really important. So, you know, when we're thinking about induction processes, you know, think about having our trace elements on board as well as the vaccines.
Yep. So I'm assuming if a property's got trace elements in their soil, the plants are going to be quite complete, but coming in, they'll need something like an injection for a fast-acting one, or is it in the actual farm system, is that enough?
It depends on what sort of trace element programs people have. So in East Gippsland, it's a pretty widespread issue that we don't have great soil selenium across the board. So some producers, particularly the larger scale ones, will put selenium in the fertiliser and you can graze it. Unfortunately, the plant doesn't need selenium as much as the livestock do.
Right.
So sometimes the plant uptake is not always great. So you need to graze that selenium treated paddock
Yes,
reasonably promptly after it's spread.
I'm pretty sure I was talking to Alison about this, but there has to be a certain number of days that they're grazing the selenium paddocks to actually uptake, like be an effective year-long sort of process. So if half the farm has been treated well with selenium, say chips or selenium in the fertiliser, if they don't spend enough days on those paddocks, it may not actually do enough for the cows anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And it does need to be grazed reasonably. You need to observe the grazing withholding period, but then because we need to do it on an annual basis, and there's a graph in a study that I saw that basically it just starts to disappear almost instantly from the pasture once it's taken up by the plant. So you need to sort of graze it for the first half of the year to get the full return on investment as well.
Right. So
and it will hang around after that, but it will start to taper, and so you need to do it again annually to get the best result from it. And if you're already doing a fertiliser program, then it's not an expensive thing to add into an existing program, but it does need to be done annually. So some people do that, but there are also long and short acting injections available. Like
your Sullivan would be
Sullivan's a long acting, and there's also a whole plethora of short acting injections available on the market. So there is lots of different, and there's also the bullets as well. So that's where you put a bullet down their throat and it settles out in the rumen or the reticulum of the rumen and sits there until it eventually gets degraded. And so that's another option as well. And I think also on that note of induction, planning ahead so that, if you're going to go down the path of vaccinating for respiratory diseases, you'll also need to do a clostridial one as well. And then by the time you add in a selenium bullet and, a drench and possibly a fluke drench as well, sometimes those treatments will need to be spaced out over several yardings so we don't overload them with products.
I think it might have been you said no more than 2 treatments in one yarding. Is that right?
Yeah, 2 to 3 is my sort of rule of thumb. So
No. Oh, that's good. Anything else on that before we move on?
No, I don't think so.
No. Right. Well, the second part, we'll have to make this fairly short, but we've just had a bit of cattle movement into the area from fire-affected places. We've actually taken some on, and I spoke to you on the phone the other day that we've got one that started limping. They've been on the place for a couple of weeks now, and it started limping, and there's a possibility of burnt feet that takes some days to actually show any signs of it. Talk to us about when cattle or livestock, sheep, whatever it might be, have gone through fire. What are some things that you're looking at in the first 12 to 24 hours, and then how we're caring for those animals post that as well?
Yeah, so heart goes out to anyone that's dealing with those ramifications at the moment. It's been a pretty tragic summer for some people, unfortunately. So
I heard some statistics recently of livestock's lost, and it's a lot apparently. So
yeah, and I as a new grad practiced in Mansfield, and so yeah, watching that fire move across that district, I used to practice there, so it was quite sad to think about, knowing that some of my former clients were probably losing livestock and fencing and things like that. People that I used to, really enjoy going out to see. So, it's just heartbreaking, heartbreaking. But yeah, in terms of what we're looking at for the cattle, any sort of, fire damage around the eyes and face where, that's going to compromise their capacity to eat in the immediate period is pretty important. And also
so you'll see blistering, missing hair.
Yeah, and also, if there's squinting in the eyes because of, corneal surface of the eye burns, sometimes we'll need to look at destroying those cattle pretty promptly. Some sources in terms of, how much. Is
that because of future infections and whatnot?
And just the stress and pain as well. Having an eye ulcer, particularly from like fire damage, is extremely, extremely painful. Right. So, any sort of particularly bad eye problems, especially because those animals are going to have to be, kept in close confinement where, they'll be put into some sort of containment area immediately afterwards. It's quite stressful, and the likelihood of them injuring themselves is quite high. So the other thing to look at is the udder as well, not necessarily for immediate euthanasia, but if there's a cow that's obviously got a calf at foot, we need to know if it can continue to feed its calf and whether we need to look at pulling those calves off. So looking at the udder for signs of severe damage as well, and sometimes these things take several days to come out. Yeah. And then, as you said, the other main important one is the feet as well. So those laminae, which we've, I think, discussed previously in the past with laminitis and acidosis and things like that, the laminae in the feet that hold the hoof capsule on are very, very sensitive. So if there's been excessive heating, sometimes the feet might externally look okay, but if you look around that coronet band and there's signs that there's separation, that would probably be some sort of prompt to consider destroying that animal as well. Sometimes if the separation's around the heel but not the toe, you can get away with it, but it's something that you'd probably want to get a vet to obviously examine, and often in these circumstances AgVic will roll out district officers to assist producers with making those decisions as well. So
yeah, now what about once we've done that initial inspection and they're okay, there's gone from grass diet, dry grass over there at the minute, to no grass. How are we managing that transition for them? Because we can't sort of ease them into some sort of feeding program because there's nothing around, I guess. So. Yeah.
So it's you mean on the farms themselves?
If they can, if they have got space to do it. Or I know the yards were full of cattle for days and days, sort of thing. So they would have had to be fed and watered in there. So
yeah. So usually just trying, I guess, to find some sort of supplementary feed that closely matched what was on the paddock prior to it being burnt. So a lot of the time, though, unfortunately, you don't always get to be too choosy with what gets delivered. And often, the cow will eventually adapt. You'd expect some weight loss in that initial couple of weeks just because the rumen will have to adapt to that new roughage. But having said that, if it's just a reasonable quality hay and there's no grain and, there's no major energy requirement for lactation and things like that, usually they should eventually come around to it as long as they're, physically able to eat. I wouldn't imagine that would cause too much of a major problem. But I guess just, making sure also that you're continuing to check the feet every few days, because as you're finding, even though that initial assessment may seem okay, those laminae can sometimes take several days to show that damage. So, you know, and sometimes, you know, if there's chronic damage but they're walking around reasonably sound, you can sometimes just nurse them with, you know, close confinement so they're not having to walk long distances for feed, and they can recover. It's one of those things where you just need to, I guess, monitor how comfortable the animal is and, you know, utilise your vet relationship to get pain relief on board so that they're kept comfortable. You know, in drastic circumstances, you could down the track consider a claw amputation if one of the claws is affected and the other one isn't. But yeah, you'd need to obviously get a vet evaluation to consider if that's an option. So
now, one thing when I rang, or the producer rang me up and said, how are they going? Are they calm still? Because he's got really, really calm cattle, he said. And he was worried because the fire went through, that stress can actually socially change the behaviour of the animal. Have you seen any of that, or is there things that we can actually do to help with that?
I wouldn't say that I've had producers anecdotally go, oh, we bought those and they were fire affected and they're permanently frazzled and things like that. Probably what I would say is, you know, if you're on a really high, you know, hay or conserved fodder diet, you could look at just putting calcium, magnesium loose lick out, just, you know, cover that base to prevent any, you know, marginal grass tetany and things like that, and some salt as well, just to help that macro element balance. But yeah, with time, I'd like to think most of them would recover, but I mean, it's so stressful for them. So
yeah, well, these older cows are as quiet as can be. You could just about pat them in the paddock. But he said, "Oh, I've had trouble with the heifers," and then he said, "Having said that, every year I have trouble with the heifers, so may not be the fires, but." Oh, that's good. Anything else that we should be thoughtful of going through these things, apart from, like, we're talking on a purely animal basis here, because there's a whole other topic in human.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think sometimes, and I haven't so much had the experience with fire-affected cattle, but I have gone out to a couple of instances where animals have, like one case I can think of that really stuck with me was a severe heat stress event in some dairy cows where I've driven out to a paddock and there's, you know, 4 or 5 dead cows and another 10 or 15 that were down. And, you know, sometimes, and I sort of remembered thinking to myself, what can I do? And I looked around at all the people that are just absolutely grief-stricken and, you know, giving them jobs to do to get them, you know, not thinking about the problem, but feeling like they're doing something about it, I guess. And just, yeah, it sort of made me stop and think that, for me, my job in that moment wasn't to fix the animals. It was actually just to support the people that were there as well, that were going through that very traumatic thing. So, you know, just giving them buckets out of the car and saying, here, just start tipping buckets of water on the cows to get them cooled down straight away. You know, and just, yeah, how to handle that from a human welfare perspective is very tactful as well. So yeah, like I said, I haven't dealt with the fire problem as much, but I have had problems where, you know, you've come out and seen mortalities and it's really confronting for everyone involved. So
yeah, no, it's a good thing to remember in these stressful situations. There's a big human element behind it all, and often these producers love these animals sometimes more than own kids, it seems like. And so it's a very stressful time for them, so it's important to remember. Now, we're actually changing up our last question. I haven't told you about this, Chelsea.
I was actually just thinking, oh God, what have I learnt recently?
Yeah, something to surprise you. You've always come up with very good ones, and we won't be able to ask this one every week, but the question this year for our guest is going to be, if you could go back to a young Chelsea and give her some advice, what would it be? Now, you can answer it this week, and then if things pop up later in the time, we'll have to come up with another one, because you can't tell yourself every month the same thing. That's not going to work. But what's something that you would tell a young Chelsea, whether it be life or whether it be vet practice or in ag circles? What would you tell yourself? No,
I actually can't answer this. That's a good question. There's this Facebook post that I have saved on my phone that the person that authored it was called Dr. Andy Rourke, and he's a small animal vet from America and obviously has a very different job to what I do, but he has a big sort of social media following, And he's done a lot of work on that, because our profession has a lot of attrition, a lot of mental health challenges, and can be extremely stressful. He, has written a lot of books on how to cope with all that. And one of his posts really sort of stuck in my mind, and it was a picture of him as a new grad and what he'd go back and tell himself. And one thing that really sort of stuck with me was that and I really agree with this, is that if you could go back, you'd go back and tell yourself that everything's going to be okay. And even if it's not worrying about it, it's not actually going to do anything. And that really stuck with me, and I still read it on a reasonably regular basis, because I think it's so true that when you're a student, it's so easy to get lost in all the subjects of things that you need to learn, and everything just, like when you're a student at vet school, everything seems impossible, and you're just dealing with exam after exam after exam, and you think, why am I doing this, and where's the light at the end of the tunnel? And that comment, everything will be okay, you'll find a way to figure it out. And worrying about it's not going to change the outcome. You need to either get out and do something about it, or find a way to actually address the problem. Don't just sit there dwelling on it. So that's what I'd say.
It's good advice, and I think that ties nicely into what you said about the human side of veterinary practice. You would often go and see a lot of difficult situations on farms with a lot of emotions, and if you can have that attitude, everything will be okay. We'll get through it.
Yeah.
It'll calm the whole situation down and make some good decisions from it. Well, Charles, really appreciate you coming in. Lots in that one, and we look forward to speaking to you next month.
Great. It's great to be back, Al. Thanks again.
No worries. All right, bye for now. A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future. This episode was brought to you by Herd Solutions, your local farm animal vets, servicing Maffra to Mallacoota.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.